We all have one Father, and heaven is our home. Indeed, that's true, but I'll tell you, it feels like home right here and now this morning. And I'm delighted to be here and be back in this spot with my brother Rick, and it's good to be here. What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. That's probably one of the top 10 passages of the Old Testament. Is it a familiar one to you? It is to many. But did you know that passage is actually part of the description of a trial? And it's one of the strangest trials you'll ever read about. The prophet Micah, acting as bailiff, summons the people of Israel to appear in a cosmic court on charges of misconduct. The jury is the mountains, and as Micah puts it, the enduring foundations of the earth. You see, the mountains and the enduring foundations of the earth are everlasting. They've seen it all. They've watched the entire history play out of the covenant between God and his people. The complainant is God. It is God who brings the accusation. He leaves the heavenly throne where he often acts as judge, and he comes to argue the case before the jury. Now think about that for just a moment. The Most High God as the prosecuting attorney, as it were, and the mountains and the enduring foundations of the earth as the jury, the mighty God bringing the case before them. Now, why does a prosecutor bring a case to court? A prosecutor brings a case to court because he or she wants to see justice done. And I'll say more about justice and Micah's understanding of what justice really is in just a minute, but for now I want to be sure to note that we are seeing a God whose desire is justice. And that's why in this strange scene it is God who brings the complaint against Israel. The particulars of the indictment are set forth in earlier passages of the book. But most simply, the people have gotten tired of doing good. They got bored with God Most High and they followed other gods. They had been given a homeland in order to be a blessing to other people. They were given a homeland not for their own benefit only, but to be a blessing to other people. They were to welcome the stranger. They were to take care of the poor. They were to be a light to all the nations. But that just wasn't happening anymore, and so God Most High brings the charges. They have become self-indulgent, chauvinistic. The gifts given for a chosen people to be a blessing are being abused and distorted, and on and on and on go the charges. And then there's a pause. There's silence in the courtroom. And there are different interpretations as to what actually happens next. Some commentators think that Israel is cut to the chase, that Israel repents and says, what must we do to be restored to right relationship with God? Others think that Israel still doesn't get it, they just don't understand, and that Micah can no longer keep quiet, no longer willing to be the bailiff who is facilitating the trial. It is Micah who speaks next. But in either case, the words are crisp and clear. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Well, that sounds like a pretty good stewardship pledge, doesn't it? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. To do justice. The Hebrew word for justice is very closely linked to the word for righteousness. In our American system, we associate justice with the judicial branch of government, the courts, law enforcement agencies, prisons, and so forth. But Hebrew justice would be primarily a function of the legislative and executive branches, because justice is not just a matter of correcting wrongs by determining guilt and meting out punishment. Justice for the Hebrews was preventing the conflict from occurring at all, by maintaining right relationships so the conflict and crime never really gain a foothold. It is strengthening a community for the benefit of all so that poverty, for example, never becomes a problem. Doing justice, the bottom line is doing justice is simply doing what is right for the entire community. Love kindness. Loving kindness is, in my opinion, a very weak English translation of the Hebrew word. Another frequent translation is mercy. That's the one I used in the title for the sermon today. But in my opinion, a much better phrase is persevering love. The Hebrew word is chesed, and it's often used to describe the very fundamental character of God. It refers to God's unrelenting grace. I think we have a hymn in our book of worship somewhere about God's unrelenting grace. His unrelenting grace that is extended over and over and over, regardless of whether his people are obedient or disobedient. The story of the Hebrew people is the story of God's grace, is continuing to reach out and pursue them. God continues to extend love and grace to his people no matter what. That persevering love is what loving kindness really is. Okay, so much for that very abbreviated exegesis. And so what might that bring us to understand what it means to do justice and to love kindness? First of all, it means that we take initiatives to strengthen community, to build relationships of dignity and mutual respect, to engage in that which contributes to the well-being of everyone. And second, to persevere, to keep doing it on and on, no matter what. As many of you know, members of our Provincial Elders Conference, that's the governing board for a province of the Moravian Church, members of our Provincial Elders Conference meet periodically with church boards to review the life of the congregation. When I had the privilege to be involved in that process, one of our primary aims was to press congregation leaders to consider the degree to which they existed to serve others, the degree in which they were doing justice, in the sense that we are talking about justice today. And when we asked about outreach, these church leaders, almost without exception, would come up with a good list of mission activities. And we always felt very good about that. But as time went by, I began to wonder whether there might be a prior question that we ought to be asking ourselves. What are our criteria for truly being a congregation in mission? What will help keep us honest in deciding whether our focus really is outward or inward, whether we really exist to serve others or to serve ourselves? Should we try to set some kind of standards that would be feet to the fire criteria for justice, as opposed to just making sure we could come up with a good list of mission activities? And if we would work on standards like that, what might they look like? I'd like you to think about that sometime, but one obvious criterion is money, perhaps a percentage of the budget. What percentage of the budget should go for outreach causes? 10%? 50%? 80%? Or suppose a congregation would say, for every 50 members we have, we will have an active task group of 5 people addressing some justice concern. Or maybe there would be some who would say, we will look at every single worship service we have and be sure that somewhere in that service we are concerned about outreach, about justice, about doing for others. This morning, one of our Sunday school classes is beginning a study of what we call the Beatitudes, which are pronouncements of blessing, as we usually read them. But one scholar who knows Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke, tells us that the blesseds we get from New Testament Greek don't really convey the intent and meaning of Jesus' original language. No, the Beatitudes are more like the prophecies of Micah, this scholar says, because they call for persevering initiatives for the well-being of the world. And this scholar might give the traditional Beatitudes a somewhat different reading, such as, God calls you to get up and move, you who are poor in spirit. Straighten up, you people who grieve, for you will be comforted. Set yourself in a new direction, you who hunger and thirst for righteousness. When you do acts of mercy, you will receive mercy. This scholar says the Beatitudes are, in fact, a call to get up and move, to get involved, or as he often says, to get your hands dirty. As some of you have already guessed, the scholar is Palestinian Archbishop Elias Shakur. And from the day he was assigned to a parish in a little village that was poverty-stricken and conflict-ridden, he has done just that, get your hands dirty. Figuratively, he has done so by challenging injustice at all levels, from the local level to the highest levels of Israeli government. Literally, he has done so by personally mixing sand, stone, and cement to build schools. I've watched many of you get your hands dirty, both literally and figuratively, in your commitment to justice. The home church congregation has been doing that for 241 years. I'm not suggesting this is not a part of life of home church. Clearly it is. We've talked about the Samaritan Inn this morning. We've recently been involved at Alders Point. I drive by Diggs Latham School, and there's a sign there that says, "Thank you, Home Moravian Church." And there are many other ways that this congregation has been involved in justice. But it's always such a danger that we become focused on ourselves and primarily concerned about our own comfort and our own sanctuary. I think we all need to continue to ask that question all the time. Once we asked Bishop Shakur what message he would send home with us, giving the seeming unending quest for the kind of justice that would bring peace in the Middle East. His reply, tell them we are still here. When it comes to working for justice, let it always be said of Home Moravian Church, we are still here. Amen.